Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on what really separates a professional writer from everyone else. And here's a spoiler, it's not magic. It's a fascinating deep dive into psychology. And it all starts with a struggle we all know way too well. Oh yeah, we've all been there, right? That feeling of just paralysis in front of a blank screen or an empty page. It's a universal struggle. But it turns out there's a very real, very specific psychological reason why writing feels so uniquely challenging. So to really get a handle on the solution, we've got to properly define the problem first. And it turns out the challenge of writing is just fundamentally different from almost any other skill we learn. To see what I mean, let's compare it to something with super clear rules, like a game of chess. So psychologists have this way of categorizing problems. You've got well-structured and ill-structured. A game of chess, that's a classic well-structured problem. The goal is simple, checkmate. The rules are totally fixed. Writing, though? Oh man, writing is what they call an ill-structured problem. You're juggling all these goals at once, and they often fight each other. Should you prioritize clarity or persuasion, brevity or detail? There's just no single correct move, and that's what makes it such a huge mental workout. Okay, so if writing is this super complex problem, what in the world is going on inside our heads when we're trying to tackle it? Well, it's, kind of like a three-ring circus in there. Research has basically broken it down into three core things our brain is doing. First, you've got planning, coming up with ideas, trying to figure out how they connect. At the very same time, you're translating, wrestling those abstract thoughts into actual words and sentences. And simultaneously, you're also reviewing, constantly looking back at what you just wrote, checking for mistakes, and just asking, does this even make any sense? But here's the kicker. These are not happening in a nice, neat 1, 2, 3 order. Nope, they're all happening at once, all the time. This mental chaos, it was perfectly captured in this classic quote from a couple of researchers, Flower and Hayes. They said, "A writer looks like a busy switchboard operator." I love that analogy. You're not just writing, you're constantly plugging and unplugging all these connections between ideas, words, and what your audience needs. It's no wonder it feels so exhausting. So if every single writer is dealing with this crazy cognitive overload, how do the experts actually manage to tame the chaos? What's their secret? Well, they've developed this really specific mental toolkit that helps them cut right through all that noise. It really comes down to a few key advantages. First, they just have a superior verbal ability, a real mastery of language. Second, they have deep, deep knowledge of whatever their subject is, whether that's astrophysics or ancient Rome. And third, and this is so important, they've built this kind of mental superhighway, which lets them access information stored in their long-term memory incredibly fast. And you can actually see this difference in the very rhythm of their writing. When researchers measured how people compose, they found that novices tend to write in these short little bursts, maybe 5 or 6 words, before they have to pause. But the experts, they produce nearly double that, 10 to 12 words per burst. Now, that difference isn't just a number. It represents a huge leap in cognitive fluency. It's not just that they're thinking faster. Their brains are literally processing the language itself more efficiently. But, it's not all just about raw cognitive horsepower, right? A huge part of the battle is managing the emotional side of writing. The frustration, the self-doubt, that pesky inner critic. That stuff is just as important. So, what's your style? Researchers have found that most successful writers kind of fall into one of two camps. First, you've got the Beethovians. These are the writers who just dive right in. They figure out what they want to say as they're writing, creating these really messy first drafts that they know they're going to revise like crazy. Then you have the Mozartians. These are the meticulous planners. They create super detailed outlines and think everything through before they even write a single sentence, aiming for a nearly perfect first draft. And you know what the key takeaway is? There is no one right way to do it. Both work. But regardless of their style, a lot of experts are chasing this one thing, the flow state. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's that magical feeling where you're so totally absorbed in what you're doing that the outside world, your own self-consciousness, even time itself just seems to melt away. Now, you can't just flip a switch and turn it on, but experts get really good at creating the conditions that make flow more likely to happen. Okay, so how do you get there? How do you go from staring at that blank page to hitting that state of expert flow? Well, it is not a gift. It's a skill that is forged over time. And the engine that forges all expertise is something called deliberate practice. Now, this is not just mindlessly putting in the hours. It's a very specific, highly structured kind of effort. It has to be focused on getting better, You need feedback so you know if you are getting better, and this is crucial. It has to constantly push you just a little bit outside of your comfort zone. This is maybe one of the most incredible examples of deliberate practice I have ever come across. As a young writer, Joyce Carol Oates would apparently write entire novels, not to get them published, but just as a training exercise. She'd finish one, turn the stack of pages over, and start a brand new one on the back. And then she would throw the whole manuscript away. I mean, wow. That is the absolute definition of effort that is motivated purely by improvement. So how long does all this deliberate practice actually take? Well, studies across a ton of different fields all point to this 10-year rule, and writing is no exception. Research on creative writers found it took, on average, 10.6 years from their very first publication to the publication of what was considered their best work. This really shows that mastery is a marathon, not a sprint. A writer's first publication isn't the finish line, it's the starting gun. What comes next is a solid decade of intense, focused, deliberate practice. I mean, think about T.S. Eliot. His absolute masterpiece, The Wasteland, was published almost exactly 10 years after his first poems ever appeared in print. Expertise it takes time. So in the end, we really need to reframe how we think about writing. It's not some innate talent that's just handed down to a chosen few. It is a skill. It's a craft. It is a hard-won victory over the cognitive chaos of that blank page. A victory that is won, word by word, through thousands of hours of focused, deliberate effort. You know, that journey of a decade, it has to start somewhere. The path to mastery is long, yeah, but it begins with a single word and the decision to practice deliberately. So the only question left is, when are you going to start your clock?